The marble courtroom fell dead silent as Judge Amy Coney Barrett leaned forward, her black robes stark against the mahogany bench, and in the next 30 seconds, something would happen that shocked the legal world and altered everything people thought they knew about judicial proceedings. At the defendant's table stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her burgundy blazer perfectly pressed and her chin lifted high even as she faced the most powerful judge in America. The case that had brought them together, a fierce challenge over controversial voting rights legislation, had already made headlines across the nation, but no one expected what Barrett was about to unleash. Congresswoman Crockett Barrett's voice cut through the silence like a blade as she declared that Crockett's record showed a pattern of disrespect for constitutional law that frankly disgusted her. The gallery gasped as legal observers exchanged stunned glances, because judges never spoke like this, but Barrett pressed on, her voice rising, as she accused Crockett of undermining the very foundations of the court and warned her that she now dared to stand before the bench expecting mercy. Crockett's legal team froze, the prosecution looked stunned, and even the court reporter hesitated in disbelief. But then something remarkable occurred, because instead of shrinking in fear or backing down, Jasmine Crockett smiled, and in that moment, she changed the entire trial. To understand why this confrontation shook the foundations of American justice, one must first know who these two women are and why their collision carried such weight. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, at 52, embodied the essence of traditional American jurisprudence. Appointed to the High Court at 48, she built her reputation on strict constitutional interpretation and unwavering conservative principles. A devout Catholic and mother of 7, she believed deeply in applying the law exactly as written rather than as judges might wish it to be. Her philosophy of originalism rooted her belief that the Constitution must be interpreted based on its meaning at the time of its drafting. Barrett's rise was not easy, as her confirmation hearings were grueling, with Democratic senators pressing her on her faith, her family choices, and her judicial philosophy. She answered calmly and with precision, never breaking under pressure, and her appointment was hailed as a triumph for conservatives who had long demanded justices who would guard against judicial activism. Having clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia and taught law at Notre Dame before serving on the Federal Appeals Court, Barrett had become widely respected as brilliant, composed, and unshakable. Until this day, she had never been publicly rattled or shown personal bias in her courtroom. Standing opposite her was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43 years old, and a relentless progressive force from Texas, who represented the very energy Barrett supporters claimed was eroding American institutions. A former public defender turned civil rights lawyer and later politician, Crockett had built her career by fighting for the voiceless and challenging entrenched power. Known for her sharp wit, her fearless clashes with Republicans, and her ability to turn political moments into viral teaching tools, she became a rising star. Her journey began in a working-class family in East Texas, and she was the first to attend college, earning a scholarship in political science before excelling in law school. As a public defender, she won cases others deemed hopeless, and as a civil rights attorney, she forced powerful corporations into settlements that shifted industry practices. Her entry into politics was meteoric, as she unseated a well-funded incumbent on a platform of voting rights and economic justice, and quickly became recognized for her razor-sharp, questioning style in Congress. Yet her boldness also made her a target with conservative media, branding her a radical who sought to dismantle American traditions. A case that united these two women began 6 months prior, when Crockett challenged new voting restrictions in Texas passed by a Republican-controlled legislature. The law demanded multiple forms of identification, reduced early voting hours, eliminated Sunday voting, which directly harmed African-American church-based voting drives, and criminalized ballot assistance for elderly or disabled citizens by non-family members. Crockett argued the legislation deliberately targeted minorities and working-class families, while presenting evidence that these communities were disproportionately disadvantaged by such requirements. Her legal team compiled data showing that reduced hours would block access for working parents who depended on evening and weekend options. The state retaliated, claiming her lawsuit was political theater and that voter identification was a common-sense measure to prevent fraud despite lacking evidence of widespread fraud. Attorney Morrison portrayed Crockett's challenge as a dangerous effort to undermine election integrity. What made this trial explosive was not only the legal battle, but also the personal history between the two women. Barrett had written decisive opinions on voting rights cases that Crockett publicly condemned as out of touch and designed to suppress voters. Their feud intensified when Crockett appeared on television questioning whether Barrett's religious convictions had improperly shaped her rulings in violation of the separation of church and state. Crockett warned that when judges consistently ruled in ways aligned with religious doctrine, Americans had to question whether they served the Constitution or their church. Conservative media replayed her comments, endlessly painting them as an attack on religious freedom, while Barrett supporters demanded an apology Crockett refused to give. Instead, she doubled down, declaring that any judge unable to separate personal belief from constitutional duty should not sit on the bench. The stakes could not be higher. If Barrett ruled against Crockett, the decision would effectively greenlight similar restrictions nationwide, opening the door to disenfranchising millions of voters for generations to come. In this courtroom silence, broken by Barrett's cutting words and Crockett's defiant smile, the future of American democracy itself seemed to hang in the balance. The marble courtroom seemed to pulse with a weight that grew heavier with every passing second as Judge Barrett's furious words hung in the air and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood calm and unwavering. Outside, the courthouse protesters chanted with raw intensity, while social media lit up with whispers of the judge's behavior pouring out from those inside. Reporters clutched their pens in disbelief, and even veteran legal scholars shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to reconcile what they were seeing with the centuries-old traditions of judicial restraint. Barrett's voice cut sharp as she brandished Crockett's record like a weapon, accusing her of contempt for American values, hostility to religion, and reckless disregard for law. Each charge landed with brutal precision, driving murmurs through the gallery and draining hope from the faces of Crockett's supporters who feared they were watching a public execution of her career. Yet in the very moment when it seemed Crockett's resolve might crack, a subtle smile spread across her face. It was not the smile of arrogance, but of someone who had been waiting for this exact strike and was ready to answer slowly and deliberately. Crockett reached into her briefcase and withdrew a leather folder so thick and meticulously prepared that even her lead attorney, Marcus Williams, moments earlier pale with worry, leaned back in dawning recognition. He had seen this look in her eyes before, the look that meant she was not trapped but baiting her opponent into overconfidence. The air in the courtroom shifted. Supporters who moments earlier buried their faces now lifted their heads with hope, while conservative observers, still grinning at Barrett's unrelenting assault, failed to realize she had just stepped into a trap laid months in advance. Barrett leaned forward with disdain, certain she had broken her opponent, while Crockett calmly placed a folder on the defense table and straightened her blazer with unhurried grace. "Your Honor," Crockett began, her voice carrying with steady resonance through the tense chamber, "I do understand the law, and more importantly, I understand when the law is being manipulated to silence the very people it was written to protect." Her words landed like stones, breaking the suffocating silence, and Barrett's narrowed eyes flickered with the first hint of unease. The gallery leaned forward, as if pulled by invisible strings, sensing that what was about to unfold would not only shape the outcome of this case, but potentially redefine the boundaries of judicial conduct in America. With one hand resting on her folder, Crockett continued, steady and deliberate, "You have accused me of disrespecting this court, but I stand here to remind you that this court exists to serve the Constitution, not the personal beliefs of any one judge, no matter how powerful." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Crockett flipped open her folder, revealing documents, affidavits, and data that none in the room expected her to have. For the first time since the proceedings began, Barrett's composure faltered ever so slightly, and Marcus Williams allowed himself the faintest of smiles. What Crockett was about to reveal had the power not just to defend her case, but to expose the very bias Barrett had allowed to seep into her courtroom, and the battle that had seemed one-sided now stood on the edge of reversal, with the fate of voting rights and the credibility of the American judiciary balanced on a knife's-edge lecture, like it was a masterclass in courtroom defiance and constitutional clarity. Professors quickly began emailing their students telling them to watch the footage immediately, because they were witnessing not just legal history, but the kind of rare, unfiltered truth that could spark a generational shift in how Americans understood judicial power. Conservative commentators scrambled to contain the fallout, some attempting to downplay the confrontation as theatrics, others visibly shaken as they acknowledged on air that Barrett's composure had cracked a way that could not be easily repaired. Cable networks that had initially scheduled short segments on the case abruptly shifted to wall-to-wall coverage with breaking banners reading "Crockett shatters Barrett" and "Judicial earthquake in Washington." The White House press team was caught off guard by the intensity of the reaction as reporters immediately pressed for comment on whether the president still supported Barrett's position. Senators who had long defended Barrett began facing a tidal wave of calls from constituents demanding answers about her conduct on the bench. By evening, a bipartisan group of lawmakers had already signaled that hearings on judicial bias and accountability might be unavoidable. Legal historians declared on live broadcast that the confrontation would likely stand alongside the most dramatic moments in courtroom history. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett herself emerged from the courthouse hours later to a scene more reminiscent of a political rally than a routine trial. Hundreds of supporters pressed against barricades, chanting her name, waving hastily printed signs, and holding their phones aloft to capture every word. Crockett raised a hand for calm, and then spoke with the same calm authority she had shown inside. "This is not about me," she said. "It is about the people who for too long have been silenced by those who believe the law is theirs to control, rather than ours to share." Her voice carried over the crowd, and reporters struggled to record every sentence as chants of justice for the people erupted again and again. By the time the sun set, the confrontation had become the single most discussed story in America. News tickers on every channel scrolled endlessly with updates. Social media feeds were consumed by clips, memes, and live reactions. And within 24 hours, Jasmine Crockett had gone from a relatively unknown congresswoman turned defendant into a national figure whose words were being quoted in classrooms, living rooms, and congressional offices alike. Barrett retreated into silence, canceling all appearances as speculation about her future reached a fever pitch. What began as a courtroom hearing had transformed into a constitutional reckoning, and Jasmine Crockett now stood at the center of a movement that no one could have predicted, but that no one could stop.